Have you ever laid awake at like 3 in the morning, just staring at the ceiling and utterly stressing out about the fact that you aren't getting your mandatory 8 hours of sleep?
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst feeling in the world.
Right. You look at the glowing numbers on your clock or, you check your phone and you just start doing that awful mental math.
Oh, the countdown. Yeah.
Exactly. Like if I fall asleep right this second, I can still get um 4 hours and 20 minutes.
And then 10 minutes pass.
Yes. 4 hours and 10 minutes. And the anxiety just builds, your heart rate elevates. And ironically, the stress over not sleeping becomes the exact biological mechanism keeping you awake.
It is a vicious cycle.
It really is. And we are constantly just relentlessly bombarded with this messaging that modern life has fundamentally broken our ability to sleep.
Right, like we're told our screens, our stress, our work schedules, that they've all ruined this pure biological necessity that our ancestors supposedly perfected.
But today's deep dive sets out to challenge literally everything you think you know about a good night's rest.
Yeah, it really flips the script.
It does. We are exploring why this modern, epidemic of insomnia might actually be a massive misunderstanding of our own biology.
And perhaps even more shockingly, how where you live, like your specific country and its culture, actually determines exactly how much sleep you need to be healthy.
So we are pulling from two absolutely fascinating sources for this. The first is an eye-opening new book and an interview with the author, evolutionary anthropologist David R. Sampson.
This is called The Sleepless Ape, the story of sleep and human evolution.
Right. And the second is this massive multinational study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS.
Which is a huge deal. They analyzed the sleep habits and the health outcomes of people across 71 different countries.
It's just staggering data. And combining these two sources, it gives us this remarkably comprehensive timeline,
Yeah, Sampson's work takes us back roughly 2 million years to the African savanna. He's really attempting to reconstruct the deep evolutionary roots of our sleep architecture.
And then the PNAS study drops us right into the present day, revealing how that ancient biology actually interacts with modern industrialized societies.
Because the present-day situation is grim, at least according to the medical data we usually see.
Yeah, society treats rest like a malfunctioning software program that needs, like, a chemical patch.
Oh, completely. The sources cite this staggering statistic from the Spanish Society of Neurology.
Right. What was it?
They estimate that more than half of adults sleep fewer hours than recommended, and nearly 50% fail to get restorative rest.
And the use of sleeping pills has tripled in less than 20 years.
Exactly. We view our bodies as broken machines.
But Sampson provides this profound counter-narrative, which I love. He suggests that our modern, seemingly shorter sleep isn't a broken system at all.
No, not at all.
No.
Instead of being a sign of biological decay, sleeping less might actually be our species' greatest evolutionary advantage.
Which sounds so counterintuitive. I mean, to understand that framing, we really have to contextualize human beings within the broader primate family tree.
Right, because we do not exist in a biological vacuum.
We don't. When evolutionary biologists look at primates as an order, the baseline for sleep is remarkably high. Like, primates are, across the board, champion sleepers.
Oh, their daily allocation of time to just being unconscious is staggering compared to us.
I was looking at the duration data in the source material, and the numbers
Yeah.
are wild. The owl monkey sleeps roughly 17 hours a day.
17 hours.
They are awake for 7 hours. Tarsiers sleep about 15 hours a day. Lemurs spend between 13 and 14 hours asleep.
And even as we move closer to humans on the evolutionary tree, looking at the great apes like chimps, orangutans, gorillas, they're still averaging about 9.5 to 10 hours of sleep in every 24-hour cycle.
So if you just follow that trend line, you'd assume that human beings, as these large-brained great apes, should easily be sleeping 10 hours a night.
Well, and that assumption is actually quantifiable.
Wait, really?
Yeah, Sampson and his team utilized something called predictive phylogenetic modeling to establish what a human sleep baseline ought to be.
Okay, break that down for me. What is a phylogenetic model?
So it's a highly sophisticated statistical tool that accounts for the entire evolutionary history of a group of organisms. In this case, looking at over 30 different primate species.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and it controls for a multitude of complex variables. It factors in brain size, body mass, specific dietary niches, the complexity of social structures.
And whether they sleep in trees or on the ground for that.
Exactly. Arboreal versus terrestrial. So it's basically a mathematical recipe for a primate.
Right, you plug in like large brain, bipedal, lives in large social groups, terrestrial, and the model just spits out the biological baseline.
Yes. And when Sampson ran this model for Homo sapiens, the model predicted that humans should be sleeping 11.5 hours out of every 24.
That is insane. Almost half of our lives should be spent unconscious based purely on our biological blueprint.
But the global human average across all societies, whether we're talking about megacities or small foraging groups, is about 7 hours.
So we are deviating from our biological blueprint by 4.5 hours every single day.
Yeah. Sampson calls this a radical evolutionary experiment. We basically became the shortest sleeping primate by a massive margin.
It's like we pulled off a biological heist. We have this incredibly complex, energy-hungry brain, and yet we're running it on a fraction of the sleep fuel of our closest primate relatives.
The timeline for this shift is what's really fascinating.
Right, about 1.8 million years ago.
Exactly. During the era of Homo erectus, our ancestors made this monumental shift from the forest canopy to the ground.
They stopped building those sleeping platforms in the trees and just started sleeping on the terrestrial earth.
Which, frankly, sounds terrifying.
It sounds like a terrible idea. You're out on the savannah, in the dark, surrounded by apex predators.
Saber-toothed cats, massive hyenas, leopards.
And you just decide to lie down and go unconscious.
Right. It was an environment of intense vulnerability. In a tree, a primate can afford to have these long, drawn-out, deep slumbers because the height provides a buffer against predators.
But on the ground, sleeping deeply for 11.5 hours would be a death sentence. The probability of predation would just be catastrophically high.
So survival required a complete structural overhaul of our sleep architecture. It necessitated secure, highly social sleeping arrangements.
Which means we had to sleep in groups.
Exactly. We developed what anthropologists call sentinel behavior.
That's where individuals take turns being semi-vigilant throughout the night, right?
You got it. Someone is always keeping watch, even if it's just in a light state of arousal.
But, the environmental dangers alone don't fully explain that massive drop in total hours.
No, the crucial catalyst was a technological breakthrough.
Fire.
The control of fire. It completely changed our energy budget.
Before fire, our ancestors, like modern chimps or gorillas, had to spend this enormous portion of their waking day just mechanically breaking down raw, fibrous food.
Gorillas can spend up to 11 hours a day just chewing.
11 hours. The caloric expenditure required just to digest raw food is immense.
It requires massive facial musculature, heavy jawbones, a very long, energy-intensive digestive tract.
But the invention of cooking was a paradigm shift. By applying heat to food, we basically outsourced our digestion.
Right. Cooking pre-digests food. It breaks down tough cellular plant walls and denatures meat proteins.
Making all those calories instantly accessible to the body, so the time budget shifted dramatically.
Instead of chewing for 11 hours to extract enough energy to survive, early humans could consume the same amount of caloric energy in roughly an hour.
And this is where the evolutionary pressure on sleep really intensifies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because we no longer needed 11 hours to chew, and because we couldn't safely sleep for 11 hours on the predator-rich ground anyway, natural selection began to aggressively trim our sleep budget.
But it didn't just shrink everything evenly, right? It fundamentally changed the composition of our rest.
That's the key. Evolution trimmed down our non-REM sleep, the lighter, less restorative stages.
So we concentrated the crucial, biologically vital phases of sleep-like REM and slow-wave deep sleep into this much tighter, more efficient window.
We developed an architecture that allowed us to extract the maximum neurological and physical restoration in the minimum amount of time.
And the implications of that physiological compression are just staggering.
By reducing our chewing budget by 10 hours, and compressing our sleep budget by 4.5 hours.
Human beings suddenly found themselves with a massive surplus of waking time. And we didn't just sit around with that newly freed up time.
We reinvested it into the exact behaviors that define our species.
Yes. Those extra hours were utilized for intense socializing around the hearth, strengthening complex community bonds.
Transferring knowledge through early language, napping flint, developing sophisticated tools.
Coordinating complex hunting strategies, and eventually driving our migration across the entire globe. We basically traded sleep for civilization.
Those sacrificed 4.5 hours of unconsciousness built the human world.
It totally reframes the modern anxiety. Sleeping less isn't a modern failing, it's the foundational superpower of our cognitive and social dominance.
But that insight naturally leads to friction with our current reality.
Right, because if evolution perfectly programmed us to sleep less and be highly efficient about it, why do so many people feel chronically exhausted today?
Because the prevailing narrative is that modern technology, smartphones, artificial light, the 24-hour news cycle is actively destroying our sleep quality.
Yeah, because I can understand the evolutionary argument intellectually, but when my alarm goes off at 6 a.m., I still feel terrible.
Naturally.
And I immediately blame the fact that I was, like, doom scrolling until midnight.
Well, to figure out if our modern environment is actually the culprit, Samson didn't just rely on ancient fossils or mathematical models.
Right. He conducted immersive ethnographic fieldwork with contemporary small-scale hunter-gatherer societies.
He lived with the Hads in Tanzania, the Bayak in the Congo Basin, and the Himba in Namibia.
These are populations living in environments that very closely mimic the ancestral conditions under which our sleep architecture evolved.
He physically embedded himself in their camps to record their biometrics.
And the common, somewhat romanticized assumption is that people living in a state of nature, away from the glare of blue light, must be getting pristine, unbroken, perfect sleep.
But the empirical data shatters that noble savage myth completely.
It really does. These non-industrialized societies sleep significantly less than we do in the modern Western world.
On average, the data shows they sleep about 6.4 hours a night.
That is about 45 minutes less than the modern global average. They are out in nature, completely off the grid, and sleeping under 6.5 hours.
Furthermore, if we apply our modern clinical standards to their sleep, the quality appears remarkably low.
Okay, how so?
Well, in sleep medicine, we use a metric called sleep efficiency, which calculates the percentage of time a person spends actually asleep while they are physically in bed.
Right, and in large-scale industrialized societies, our sleep efficiency generally hovers around 88%.
The National Sleep Foundation considers anything over 85% to be an indicator of high-quality sleep.
So modern humans are actually getting a pretty high grade on sleep efficiency.
But the hunter-gatherer populations Samson studied have a sleep efficiency of around 70%.
That is a massive drop.
Their sleep is highly fragmented. They wake up frequently during the night.
They tend the fire, they soothe a restless child, they investigate a noise in the brush.
Or they simply sit up and converse with a neighbor across the camp. Their nights are remarkably fluid, moving between wakefulness and light sleep.
If a modern sleep clinician looked at that data in a vacuum, 6.4 hours of duration and 70% efficiency, they would almost certainly diagnose chronic insomnia.
Oh, absolutely. They'd prescribe medical intervention. If a Hadza hunter wore a commercial fitness tracker, the device would send constant alerts warning of poor recovery.
Yet the physical reality completely contradicts our metrics. These populations exhibit incredible health markers.
They suffer from negligible rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, or the mental health crises that plague industrialized nations.
They are profoundly healthy despite failing our modern tests for good sleep, which really highlights a glaring flaw in how we measure rest.
We are obsessing over the superficial numbers, duration, and efficiency while ignoring the context.
Samson argues that their health is supported by what he calls circadian synchronization.
Right. Their sleep isn't better because it's longer or more solid. It's better because it is perfectly aligned with their environment.
So explain this network of clocks to me.
Circadian synchronization requires us to view human biology not as having just a single master clock, but as a vast decentralized network of millions of independent timing mechanisms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every organ, every tissue layer, practically every cellular structure has its own metabolic rhythm.
And in modern societies, we've systematically engineered an environment that isolates these clocks from natural cues.
We live inside climate-controlled structures, maintained at a constant 72 degrees. We expose our retinas to harsh blue-shifted light that mimics high noon at 10 o'clock at night.
We consume dense caloric meals long after the sun has set. We are bombarding our internal network with conflicting signals.
It creates biological static.
Like the brain senses the blue light from the television and signals that it is midday, suppressing melatonin.
But the digestive system hasn't received food in several hours, signaling a fasting state typical of late night.
So the body is just in a state of constant low-level confusion.
Exactly. Now, small-scale societies like the Himba, who, remarkably, average only about 4.5 hours of nocturnal sleep experience, None of this static.
4.5 hours. But they don't erect barriers between their physiology and the natural world.
They are continuously exposed to the natural, gradual progression of the solar cycle, from the dawn to the fading amber of dusk.
And crucially, they experience the ambient temperature drop that naturally occurs after sunset, which is one of the most powerful biological triggers for initiating sleep.
Their physical exertion and their caloric intake are intimately tied to the daylight hours. Because their external environment provides unambiguous, unified signals, all of those disparate internal clocks synchronize seamlessly.
Their circadian rhythms possess a structural integrity that ours lack. Because all their internal systems are metabolically unified, the sleep they do get operates at absolute maximum biological efficiency.
Even if it's only 4.5 or 6.4 hours, the immune system generates T cells without disruption. The glymphatic system clears metabolic waste from the brain effectively.
They don't require 8 unbroken hours because their bodies aren't expending energy fighting a contradictory environment.
Meanwhile, we are agonizing over hitting an arbitrary 8-hour target, viewing it as a moral failing when we fall short, when the actual pathology is environmental mismatch.
We are demanding that our bodies perform a delicate physiological process in an environment actively engineered to promote wakefulness.
Which is doomed to fail.
So, environmental synchronization explains why hunter-gatherers thrive on short sleep. But that leaves us with a massive question regarding the rest of the planet.
Because we don't live on the savannah.
Exactly. We can't all abandon our climate-controlled homes and sleep around a campfire. So if you take a modern, industrialized human and strip away that pristine environmental sink, does shorter sleep suddenly become the biological poison we're told it is?
The macro study published in the PNAS sought to answer exactly that.
Right. They aggregated data from 14 past cross-cultural investigations, pulling together 353 national sleep duration means from 71 different countries.
It is a phenomenal dataset, encompassing a massive cross-section of the global population.
But comparing raw sleep duration against health outcomes across entirely different nations is statistically perilous.
Extremely perilous. They had to institute rigorous, multi-level controls to isolate sleep as a variable.
Like what?
They controlled for GDP, utilizing it as a proxy for national wealth and general access to healthcare. They incorporated a nutrition index, acknowledging that diet heavily influences baseline health.
And they also controlled for the Gini coefficient, right?
Yes, which measures economic inequality within a society. Because systemic inequality is a profound chronic stressor known to degrade public health independent of sleep.
So they are mathematically leveling the playing field, and they also controlled for a fascinating geographic variable, latitude.
Distance from the equator physically alters a country's sleep duration.
That is wild. The further away from the equator a nation is located, the longer their national average sleep time tends to be.
That variable is a direct manifestation of Sampson's environmental argument playing out on a macro scale. It relates to the dramatic seasonal shifts in photoperiods, the length of daylight availability.
Because high-latitude countries experience long, extended periods of darkness during winter, which naturally prompts longer periods of rest and melatonin production.
And near the equator, the relatively stable 12-hour light-dark cycle keeps sleep durations shorter and more consistent throughout the year.
It proves that even within highly industrialized societies flooded with artificial light, the overarching solar cycle still dictates baseline human behavior.
It's incredible. So they take all these 71 countries, adjust for wealth, diet, inequality, and sunlight, and then track national health outcomes.
Right, like ischemic heart disease, diabetes prevalence, and overall life expectancy.
The core question is, do the nations that sleep less inherently suffer from worse health?
And the data says no. At a national level, countries with shorter average sleep durations do not demonstrate worse health outcomes.
There is no significant correlation proving that a nation sleeping 6.5 hours has a sicker population than a nation sleeping 8 hours.
If the conventional wisdom were true, if sleeping less than 7 or 8 hours were a universal biological toxin, the aggregate data across 71 countries would inescapably reflect that damage.
The shorter sleeping nations would have to be demonstrably sicker.
The fact that they aren't is a massive disruption to standard sleep science. And furthermore, the data revealed a striking paradox regarding weight.
Yes, the researchers found that countries where populations slept longer actually exhibited higher national rates of obesity.
Which feels completely counterintuitive. I mean, almost every individual study I've ever read suggests that sleep deprivation causes weight gain.
Usually by disrupting the hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin, making you crave high-calorie foods.
Exactly. But this macro data suggests more sleep equals higher obesity. How does that work?
Well, this is where we must apply strict analytical rigor. The apparent contradiction is a classic manifestation of what statisticians call the ecological fallacy.
Okay, explain the ecological fallacy for us.
The ecological fallacy occurs when we assume that statistical patterns observed at an aggregate population level apply directly to individuals within that population.
Do you have an example?
A common textbook example is observing that cities with more hospitals have higher mortality rates and fallaciously concluding that hospitals cause death.
Ignoring the reality that sick individuals congregate in your hospitals.
Precisely. So applying that to the sleep data, we cannot take the national trend and apply it to a single person.
Right. Within any specific country, clinical studies consistently confirm that an individual who is chronically sleep deprived relative to their peers is at an elevated risk for obesity.
Yes, due to those exact hormonal disruptions we just talked about. But when you zoom out to the national level, broader cultural variables eclipse the individual sleep mechanism.
Because countries that culturally prioritize longer sleep durations might simultaneously possess more sedentary lifestyles or dietary environments that drive obesity completely independent of their sleep habits.
We can't use this study to say, I personally should sleep 5 hours a night to lose weight. That would be a complete misuse of the data.
But avoiding the ecological fallacy doesn't negate the broader finding. The macro data absolutely shatters the idea of a universal magic number of sleep hours required for human health.
Exactly. If exactly 8 hours were a rigid biological mandate encoded in human DNA, no amount of cultural variation could shield a 6.5-hour nation from systemic health failures.
Yet those nations thrive. That implies the ideal amount of sleep is incredibly malleable.
It forces us to ask, if biology isn't setting a rigid boundary, what is dictating these massive variations in national sleep averages?
To investigate that, the PNAS researchers moved beyond the national aggregates and conducted a second, highly granular study.
They surveyed nearly 5,000 specific individuals across 20 different countries.
And this individual-level data is where we truly see that sleep is not merely a biological function. It is a profound cultural act.
Looking at the data from those 20 countries, the extremes are vast. On one end, you have Japan, recording the shortest average sleep duration in the study at 6 hours and 18 minutes.
And on the other end, France boasts the longest average sleep duration at 7 hours and 52 minutes.
That is a difference of an hour and a half every single night.
If you compound that over a year, the average Japanese person is experiencing over 500 more hours of wakefulness than the average French person.
It's an enormous behavioral delta for members of the exact same species living in comparable industrialized democracies.
When the researchers analyzed the health outcomes of these individuals, they used a composite score that tracked depression, chronic medical conditions, and subjective well-being.
And when they plotted that against their reported sleep duration, a remarkably consistent geometric pattern emerged across every single country. They identified a distinct U-shaped curve.
I was tracing these graphs in the study. If you picture a chart where the bottom axis represents hours of sleep and the vertical axis measures poor health, the line starts very high on the left.
Meaning very short sleep correlates with very poor health.
Right. And as sleep duration increases, the line slopes downward. Health improves. It eventually hits a trough, a bottom point representing peak optimal health.
But then, as sleep hours continue to extend past that trough, the line curves back upward. Sleeping too much correlates with declining health.
It perfectly illustrates that both extremes are detrimental. However, the most vital discovery here was that the trough of the U-curve, the precise turning point for peak health, was not static.
It shifted significantly depending on the country.
The amount of sleep that correlates with peak health in Japan is fundamentally different from the amount of sleep that correlates with peak health in France.
And there was a fascinating structural quirk in the data. In every single country analyzed, the national average sleep duration was slightly less than its own mathematical optimal target.
We are all universally undersleeping our specific cultural ideal.
But the revelation that the ideal itself shifts across borders is just mind-bending.
A Japanese person experiences peak health sleeping roughly 6.5 hours because that aligns with Japanese cultural expectations.
While a French person sleeping that exact same 6.5 hours experiences a decline in health metrics because they are deviating from the French norm of nearly 8 hours.
So is this purely a psychological phenomenon, or is there physical friction at play?
The researchers define this phenomenon as cultural fit or cultural consonance. It demonstrates that individuals whose actual sleep duration closely mirrors the perceived ideal of their culture enjoy significantly better health.
And the mechanisms driving this are both deeply psychological and highly practical, right?
Yes, psychologically, human beings are highly socialized to conform to group norms. In a cultural framework like Japan, long working hours and shorter sleep durations are frequently socially coded as indicators of dedication.
Like the concept of inamiri, or sleeping on the job, showing how hard you worked.
Exactly. If you sleep 6.5 hours in Japan, you are culturally congruent. You do not suffer the chronic internalized stress of feeling as though you're failing at a basic life task.
You contrast that with a culture that fiercely protects leisure and rest, like France, with its historically codified 35-hour work week.
If you are a French citizen only sleeping 6 hours a night, you likely feel a profound sense of anxiety.
You feel you are doing something intrinsically wrong, violating a societal standard. You carry the psychological burden of nonconformity.
And the medical literature is absolutely clear that chronic psychological stress is a primary driver of systemic inflammation, which degrades overall health.
So that psychological pressure is a powerful variable, but we must also consider objective logistical friction.
Right. A society physically constructs its infrastructure around its dominant cultural norms.
If you are biologically predisposed to be an 8-hour sleeper, but you reside in a culture optimized for 6-hour sleepers, you will encounter constant practical friction.
Your commute, your working hours, and your social obligations will be entirely misaligned with your biological needs.
You might be perpetually late or forced to sacrifice crucial social networking simply because your internal clock demands rest while your society demands activity.
You are literally out of sync with the operational heartbeat of your environment.
And that friction takes a measurable physical toll on the body. This entirely upends the biological determinism of sleep.
Our need for rest is governed by DNA, yes, but it is deeply flexed and shaped by the cultural container we live in.
Which offers a tremendous sense of agency. We aren't prisoners to an arbitrary universal metric.
It does demand a practical response.
If the perfect amount of sleep is flexible, and if our ancestors managed to sleep less but achieve better biological restoration, how do we translate that into our modern lives?
Staring at the clock and attempting to sheer force 8 hours of unconsciousness is clearly counterproductive.
Samson actually offers a framework for exactly this in his book, a protocol he terms the sleep enlightenment.
It sounds somewhat grandiose, but the actual mechanics of it are incredibly grounded.
The core premise is that we actually do many things regarding sleep hygiene very well in the modern era. Like, we shouldn't flagellate ourselves over every aspect of modern life.
We possess physically secure, temperature-controlled, highly comfortable environments.
Our mattresses provide engineered orthopedic support. We do not have to endure the cognitive load of worrying about nocturnal predation.
The predator-free bedroom is an evolutionary luxury that allows for profound physiological relaxation.
What the sleep enlightenment seeks to address is the specific deficit of the modern environment, our complete detachment from biological cues.
The goal is to retain the safety and comfort of modernity while systematically layering back in the specific environmental signals our ancient physiology requires.
So let's break down the actionable protocols. The first, and arguably most critical step Samson outlines, is anchoring your circadian rhythm early in the day.
The protocol dictates that within an hour of waking, you must expose your eyes to natural outdoor sunlight.
This isn't just about feeling awake, it's a structural biological trigger.
The light hits the retina, travels to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in the brain, and signals that the diurnal cycle has begun.
And crucially, this morning light exposure simultaneously starts a biochemical countdown timer for the release of melatonin approximately 14 hours later.
You are essentially building the biochemical foundation for your night's sleep the moment you wake up.
The second protocol expands on this light exposure, advising that individuals attempt to spend at least 15% of their waking hours outdoors,
Which is roughly 2 to 2.5 hours a day.
For a standard corporate office worker commuting in the dark and sitting in a cubicle, that is a daunting target.
It requires a deliberate restructuring of a schedule, but the physiological payoff is immense.
Because this outdoor time isn't merely about fresh air, it is strictly about exposure to full-spectrum sunlight and green environments.
The biological interaction occurring at a cellular level is profound.
This was the segment of the research that completely altered my perspective. It's not just a psychological benefit of feeling calm in a park.
No, not at all.
Let's delve into the actual mechanism of full-spectrum light. specifically infrared light, and how it physically alters our cells.
When you are outdoors, particularly amidst foliage, you are being bombarded by infrared light. Leaves absorb visible light for photosynthesis, but reflect massive amounts of near-infrared light.
And unlike visible light, which stops at the skin, near-infrared wavelengths penetrate deeply into human tissue, reaching the cellular level.
Inside our cells are the mitochondria, which handle energy production. Embedded within the mitochondria are specific terminal enzymes, notably cytochrome C oxidase.
So think of these enzymes as tiny biological solar panels embedded deep inside your cells.
That is an excellent analogy. These enzymes are chromophores, structurally sensitive to specific light wavelengths.
When near-infrared light from the sun or reflected off a tree hits the cytochrome C oxidase, it acts as a powerful catalyst.
It accelerates the mitochondria's ability to utilize oxygen and produce adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is the foundational chemical energy that powers every physiological function in the human body.
Exposure to natural environments is literally fueling cellular energy production. We are photosynthesizing our energy.
And if we remain indoors all day under artificial fluorescent lighting, we are starved of this infrared light.
Our cellular engines operate at a deficit, becoming metabolically sluggish. That sluggishness degrades our daytime energy levels, which subsequently fragments the quality of the sleep we attempt to get at night.
We must nourish our physiology with the right light environment during the day and carefully curate the light environment at night.
The evening protocol requires mimicking the ancestral conditions of the campfire.
After sunset, the goal is to shift entirely to warm, indoor lighting sources that emit light around 2000 Kelvin on the color temperature scale.
This represents the warm, amber, shifting light of a fire.
You must strictly avoid the harsh 5000 Kelvin blue-shifted light emitted by overhead LEDs and screens, because that specific wavelength actively suppresses the melatonin required to facilitate the transition into sleep.
Dim the overheads, turn on warm lamps, essentially recreate the visual environment of the savanna dusk in your living room.
Right.
There is one more cultural practice regarding rest that I want to address because the host of the Spanish interview asked Samson about it directly, the siesta.
The nap.
Given the U-shaped curve of sleep duration we saw in the PNAS study, how does a midday nap factor into this biological equation? Does it help us achieve that cultural fit, or does it disrupt the baseline?
The siesta is a subject of intense clinical debate. Samson serves on a panel for the National Sleep Foundation that spent 18 months rigorously reviewing the literature specifically regarding napping.
And the clinical consensus they arrived at is that a nap must be viewed strictly as a biological supplement.
Like taking a targeted vitamin. If your baseline diet is flawless, you don't need it. But if you are experiencing a deficit, it can provide a necessary boost.
So if you are acutely sleep deprived, perhaps due to a demanding work deadline or a temporary stressor, a strictly controlled nap of 20 to 30 minutes is a highly effective supplement.
It rapidly restores cognitive vigilance and emotional regulation without inducing sleep inertia or grogginess.
However, there is a massive caveat.
A huge one. If an individual suffers from chronic insomnia, specifically sleep maintenance insomnia, where they consistently wake up at 3 a.m. and cannot return to sleep napping, is fundamentally destructive.
That seems cruel. If someone is wide awake at 3 a.m., they are practically non-functional by 2 p.m. Why deny them a nap when they are desperately exhausted?
Because of the underlying neurochemistry of sleep drive, specifically a mechanism known as the homeostatic sleep drive.
We can conceptualize this drive as a physical pressure that builds within the brain.
Exactly. From the moment of waking, neurons begin producing a metabolic byproduct called adenosine. As the waking hours accumulate, the concentration of adenosine steadily rises.
This chemical accumulation creates an intense biological pressure that eventually forces the brain into deep, continuous, slow-wave sleep at night.
You want that pressure to be at its absolute maximum when you finally lie down in bed.
Yep.
You want the adenosine levels completely maxed out so they force you down into deep unconsciousness.
So if you yield to the exhaustion at 2 p.m. and take a nap, the brain immediately begins clearing that adenosine.
You are venting the pressure. By relieving the chemical pressure in the afternoon, you guarantee that you will lack sufficient homeostatic drive to propel you through a full night's sleep cycle.
The pressure will deplete by 3 a.m. and you will wake up again.
For the insomniac, surviving the intense afternoon fatigue is medically necessary to ensure the adenosine pressure is sufficient to sustain nighttime sleep.
Do not vent the adenosine pressure. You have to endure the fatigue to earn the deep sleep.
It's hard, but it's true.
It is also fascinating to note that evolution hasn't finished tinkering with this architecture. The sources briefly mention a specific genetic anomaly known as the DEC2 gene variant.
The DEC2 mutation provides a fascinating glimpse into the ongoing evolutionary malleability of sleep.
Individuals who possess this specific genetic variant can function flawlessly on roughly 5 hours of sleep per night.
They do not experience cognitive decline, metabolic dysfunction, or excessive daytime fatigue.
Their biology has somehow managed to further compress the necessary restorative phases of sleep into an incredibly brief window.
They are the verified short sleepers. It's an incredible biological advantage in a modern economy.
It is rare, but it is a heritable trait. It suggests that the human genome retains the capacity to further optimize our sleep efficiency.
However, Sampson cautions that there are definitive biological limits. Complex physiological processes, such as the generation of specific immune cells, require the sustained physiological state of slow-wave sleep to unfold.
Evolution may squeeze out marginal efficiencies, but the requirement for unconscious restoration cannot be entirely eliminated.
No, we will always need some sleep.
Well, we have covered an immense expanse of scientific ground today. We journeyed from the perilous, predator-dense environment of the African savanna,
Exploring how the technological mastery of fire fundamentally re-engineered our sleep architecture, condensing our rest and transforming us into the shortest sleeping primate on the planet.
We then transitioned to the modern bedrooms of industrialized nations, discovering that our health outcomes are not solely dictated by a rigid biological clock.
But rather by how seamlessly our personal sleep duration aligns with the cultural expectations of the society we inhabit.
It represents a profound synthesis of deep evolutionary history and modern sociocultural dynamics.
It really does.
So for you listening, the actionable takeaway here is to relinquish the anxiety surrounding the arbitrary 8-hour target. Stop doing the mental math at 3 a.m.
Your evolutionary ancestors constructed human civilization by sleeping less, not more.
Your contemporary health is determined as much by your environmental alignment, getting morning sunlight, exposing your cells to infrared light, and your cultural fit as it is by the raw data on your wearable device.
Sleep is not just a biological necessity to be hacked. It is a remarkably flexible cultural superpower.
And I think we'll leave you with a final provocative implication of this research.
Right. Consider what cultural consonance means in the context of our rapidly shifting global economy.
If our physical health is intimately linked to how well our sleep matches the norms of our local culture, what occurs when remote work dissolves those geographic boundaries?
That is a fascinating conflict. You could have a person whose biology and local environment demand an 8-hour cycle suddenly reporting to a corporate infrastructure running on a 6-hour cycle.
Imagine a deeply socialized French sleeper operating in an environment that prioritizes rest, suddenly integrated into a Tokyo-based corporate team that culturally validates short sleep and late hours.
We are poised to witness an unprecedented clash of biological clocks and cultural norms. As the friction of cultural consonance intensifies in a borderless workforce, perhaps the ultimate challenge of sleep hygiene isn't merely attempting to optimize your own isolated habits.
Perhaps the true frontier of health is navigating and potentially altering the sleep culture of the institutions and people you work with.
It is a profound shift in perspective.
The next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling in the dark, remember, you are not a malfunctioning machine. You are a highly evolved, perfectly adapted, sleepless ape simply trying to negotiate your environment. Stop fighting the clock, start seeking the sun, and reframe how you think about rest.